Welcome to the very first episode of our Charity Sector podcast. What we're aiming to do with these is look at the real life challenges faced by charity leaders, trustees and volunteers, and that they go far beyond the black and white of statute and legal documents. Unusual for a lawyer to say that, but true. I'm Gerry Morrison, head of our charity sector, and I've been a charity lawyer for over 20 years.
And I'm Harriet Wheeldon, a senior associate, and I work alongside Gerry in the charities team, and I've been advising charities in relation to governance and trustee duties for over 6 years.
Hello Andy. Hello. Welcome to the Wilkin, Chapman, Rollits Charity Sector podcast. We really appreciate the time you're taking to spend with us today.
Thank you for the invite.
Because we've worked together for a very long time and we're conscious you've got so much experience that you can share with other charity leaders. And what we'd like to do is have a chat with you around your work in the charity sector and what brought you to work in the sector in the first place. Is that all right?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So what got you into the charity sector, Andy?
I think when you were asking these questions, I was kind of looking back at kind of how did it come about, really. So, I mean, the first instance, I'd say benefiting from community services. So I came from a single parent background. So my father brought me up from age 11 and he was a self-employed joiner and needed to go to work and then money obviously to bring back home for us to survive. And during the summer months and during Easter and things like that, I used to go to a community centre on North Brantholme and benefit from the community services that they had there. So from that point, really, that kind of attribute of the community centres and things like that kind of helping families like ours to be able to survive or even thrive in some environments. So that was kind of my earliest experience that I can remember and kind of look at fondly. And then the kind of journey to becoming charity chief executive or a leader in the charity sector kind of came from being in the hospitality industry and being a pub landlord, which is kind of all about people and listening to people and people sharing stories. And then I travelled across the UK doing that. And when I was looking to start a family and come back to this area, I had two opportunities. One was the Willoughby Manor Hotel to be assistant manager there and carry on in the hospitality, or actually go to Dove House Hospice and be the fundraising lead there.
Do you know, I had no idea that you came into the sector through hospitality. And I think that's really interesting because charities are about people, aren't they? About helping people. So I suppose if you come from that background, you bring that experience of just talking to people and listening about what they need and transforming communities.
Definitely. I think, the other thing is anybody who walked into your pub, you don't know their background. You talk to them in the same way, you treat them in the same way and treat them with respect. And I used to enjoy dealing with complaints in the pub because it was an opportunity to help people again and to get a resolution. And I think kind of brought that through to the hospitality side, the hospitality to the charity side. And enjoyed kind of solving people's problems. And I think when you go into the charity sector, and then moving into Dove House Hospice, which is obviously the most well-known charity in the area, I think what I brought to that with the help of the colleagues that was there at the time, kind of changing the attitude a little bit. I think we'd started to get, as the hospice, a little bit of with the hospice you will support us, in an element of arrogance, but not in a nasty way, but because we were so popular as a charity, people knew what we did, whereas a lot of charities, you're fighting to tell your story. But when I went in, what I'd like to think that I did was kind of almost made us a little bit more humble about what we were doing and that actually people had a choice. And there was a lot of really great charities that was really starting to step up at that time. And we had to, be worthy of people's donations and express that. And that was about the experience of the donor, not just the experience of the beneficiary.
It's that connection, isn't it, between donors and beneficiaries and feeling that your donations make a real impact on people and having that communication, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the best kind of story I could tell you was there's a wonderful organisation called Sergeant Electrical in Beverley, an amazing family who do a lot for charity but don't really shout about it again. And they used to always do the Dove House Hospice walk, and I met them on the first year that I was there. And they did the 25-mile walk. It was a long walk.
Wow.
And they would always raise money, and every year they'd top up the fundraising from themselves. But their big thing as a family was that they used to like to get the Burgess ice cream at the end of the walk in Beverley. And this one year, the Burgess ice cream van wasn't there. So when I met them at the end of the walk, I said, have you enjoyed your experience? It was really nice. And they said, yeah, it's been great, really well organised, but we didn't get out there, just ice cream. So I sent one of my colleagues out into Beverley, where the shop was then, and got them some ice cream and brought it back. And then they had the ice cream, then they went on to sponsor the walk and all these sorts of things. So again, kind of, it's almost that, a big thing for me is how can you listen to somebody and understand what they want to get out of the relationship with the charity, not just how they can help you to achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve.
I think that's really interesting when it comes to boards, and the reason we really wanted you to come on our podcast was sort of look at board leadership and what do you think makes an effective charity leader, Andy?
So from a charity leader perspective, I think obviously the listening skills that we just talked about, I think that's a key thing, and surrounding yourself with the right people, which kind of connects back to your board and making sure you've got the right skills, but equally the right attitude. And I think sometimes people who step forward too easy to be a trustee of a charity actually aren't a trustee, they're a volunteer, and they're really, really willing and they're passionate about the cause, but actually that step to being a trustee is completely different. And I think we sometimes suffer in the charity sector of very well-meaning people who think being a trustee is just kind of an easy step. When actually it's completely different. And I used to always say to people who wanted to be a trustee and going through Trustee Academy and things like this, and you don't necessarily just think about the charity that you're passionate about, think about how your skills can be used in the best way, because then you're not too emotionally driven. I think there's great opportunities and great times where somebody who's incredibly passionate about their organisation has become a trustee, where they actually have the skill set to be able to separate the two elements to that. But if you can't separate the two elements, you're not making an effective decision. You're making an emotional decision. And 9 times out of 10, you then see a challenge for the charity financially. Only that because they'll keep going, they'll keep delivering their service, but they're running out of money, or that service is being duplicated by somebody else. And the trustees are so intertwined with the passion and the reason for being that they are looking at it from a business perspective and a finance perspective. And most importantly, for the people, whether they're paid staff or volunteers, their effectiveness and how their well-being.
It's taking that step back as a trustee, isn't it? And this is where Harriet and I do a lot of trustee training.
Training is really important at the outset of trusteeship, whether you're new to role or whether you have been a trustee or you've had a break from trusteeship. But we always recommend training every 2 years. And what does training include? It can include anything for charity trustees. So we spend a lot of time training trustees on duties and responsibilities, what you need to get started in a new role. So we always look at trustee induction training and making sure that a trustee understands the legal structure of the charities to start off with, because I think that's something that's often overlooked, but it's actually a really important part of it, because your legal structure will determine what type of governing document you have, whether it's a constitution, whether it's articles of association, and then that will impact on how you can make amendments, which is really important when it comes to strategy and forward planning. We also provide a lot of training in terms of managing conflicts of interest, which is something that's often overlooked, but it's actually an area where lots of trustees trip over, not intentionally, just because it can get quite complicated and confusing.
And I think training can give, as you say, trustees that confidence to understand their role and sometimes to help a board make really difficult decisions, because I know you've been in situations, Andy, where you've had to make really tough decisions as a board together.
Yep, and you almost don't want everybody to agree. You want that constructive challenge. I think sometimes the most uncomfortable position for a chief exec or a leader of a charity to be in is when the board are almost rolling over with decisions, and that feels great for a little while because you can get a lot of things done, but you then start to feel uncomfortable that you're not protected as the leader, or whether you're the volunteer leader or whether you're a paid chief executive. But it is particularly challenging, and I think one of the things that I've introduced at Beverley Housing Charity where we are is any new trustees that come in just to observe 2 or 3 meetings before they actually sign up to be a trustee, because I think you can give them all the documentation, all the information, but actually witnessing what's actually happening and how the decisions are made, and where the structure of the charity sits, I think is really useful. And in the last kind of restructure from a Beverley Housing Charity point of view, we had one trustee that decided not to become a trustee. And I think that was because we were going at a pace that, we didn't the person wasn't that comfortable with, because there's a lot of change happening in a positive way with good governance. But I think it was a little bit step too far, and their personal circumstances and the time that they'd need to give just didn't kind of line up. But he was really honest with us, and we were really honest with him, and we still keep in touch with him. And some of the opinions that he had have steered some of the decisions that we've made, because there's that thought process has come into a conversation. So they don't have to be a trustee or a director.
No, it's bringing them in another role as well. There's so much focus on trustees, which is brilliant, and I know charities are crying out for new trustees. But like you say, you can get people where that role might not be for them, but they can still provide input. They could be on a committee. And it's understanding how effective decisions are made, isn't it? To realise that your role is actually not always to agree.
No, definitely. And I think that's when you come out of a trustee meeting and you've had a really strong debate about something, whether you've got the answer that you want or not. I mean, myself and my colleague Gerry, we often come out of meetings and feel kind of quite tired after it, because you're putting forward your case, that directors are challenging you in the right way. And, we've not always got our way as an executive team, but if it's been done in the right way, that you feel confident that the decision actually is right. And there's one particular thing we're doing at the moment with property, where we're changing some of the property stock that we have. And we had a very different opinion on one site to what the board had, but we've gone through a really strong process and a really rigorous process, and that's what makes you feel comfortable. I think you can't always get everything right, and I think Stephen Bartlett and his podcast, and everybody talks about failure being a success, because the more failures you have, the more closer you are to getting to success. And I think that's the other thing that boards have to understand, is sometimes things will go wrong, and as long as you reflect on that and really look why did you get to that point, there's some real strengths you can find in that. And we're not going to get everything right, we're human.
Absolutely.
And I think with charities in particular, like we say, with the emotion being involved as well, when you do maybe have a challenge or a problem, I think you can take that really personally, and probably one of the things that I've learned, and it's still very hard.
We've all been there.
Who know me, it's still highly emotional. I think you still kind of, it's other people's money. You're kind of you're looking after other people's money, and it's people's lives. And I think in business, 9 times out of 10, it's shareholders and it's profit. And when you're dealing with people, you know the effect that a poor decision or a loss of income can have directly on communities.
I think that's what distinguishes the charitable not-for-profit sector from the commercial sector, isn't it? 'Cause that is driven by profits, whereas in the charity sector, it is driven by passion and dedication to a cause. And as trustees, you're looking after the assets, the funds, on behalf of other people. And I think that's what makes the charity sector really interesting. I think just going back to your point about observing meetings as a starting point before even becoming a trustee, I think that's a really key step people can take. Firstly, to understand how the board works, but also to understand the mission, really understand it before you get involved, and to make sure that you're compatible with the trustees, because whilst you want everybody on board, effective debate and discussion, what you've already highlighted, is key to charity success and good decision making. But if you're in role at the moment and you never agree with anything that the board are saying, and you provide an appropriate challenge but you can't accept that decision, then that's the point when trustees should decide whether they can continue with the charity, because people don't have to be trustees forever, but the key principle with charity trusteeship is collective responsibility, and key decision making is part of having that debate and discussion, appropriate challenge. And if a decision is made that you might not have agreed with, but it's been voted on, the majority agree, and you can collectively implement that decision, then that's great. I
think just on that point, I mean, one of the other things is making sure that everybody's voice is heard and minuted as well, because people vote for something, and you obviously you've got a number, but I think if you've got a board where, or you listen to this podcast and you've got a board where somebody's particularly quiet, one of the things that I try to do, if the chair hasn't done it, is to spot that somebody in the room hasn't said anything, and just to kind of ask them and make sure that they've had the opportunity, because in one charity that I've been involved in, not a lot of people got the chance to have their voice. It was 2 or 3 really strong characters that had a conversation before the meeting and went into the meeting with their strong opinions, and then they were driven through, and a lot of people kind of stepped back and was quite passive in the conversation. So one of the things I hear all the time now at one of the organisations I'm involved in is how much they enjoy having their voice heard, and that makes them more effective, not just in the meeting but outside of the meeting, and they come to more things, they get engaged more, because actually they've got a purpose.
It makes meetings more enjoyable, doesn't it? I mean, we've all sat through meetings and they're dominated by 1 or 2 people, and why do you want those people on your board? You want them for their experience, you want them for the knowledge that they have and the backgrounds of diversity on the board, and if their voices aren't being heard, then how do you know your decisions are effective and they're the right ones?
And that comes back to your skills matrix as well, doesn't it? So I think the biggest challenge that I always hear from charity leaders is maybe where board members have stayed too long. So being very clear about the term of office and refreshing that term of office if it's not right at the moment, and driving that through with a skills matrix. And it's uncomfortable at first, the conversations are quite uncomfortable if you've not done that before, but it's really valuable to the organisation to kind of test the skill sets you've got on a regular basis, not just kind of that one time or when you're recruiting, but when your organisation is evolving, and your ideal scenario is that you're being agile and responsive to the need of your beneficiaries within your governing document still. You need this right skills around you to make a decision, because if somebody's making a decision and they're not fully informed and you haven't got the skills at all on the board, how can they help the rest of the board to make the right and feel comfortable in making a decision? So we've very much gone down, and I did at Smile in the latter stages, was committees, having strong committee chairs as well, with that kind of really highlighted skill. I've got one trustee at the moment who hates finance and feels really uncomfortable when we delve into the deep kind of aspects of our finances, and in the past has mentioned that in the meeting, and everybody says, but we've got a finance committee, we've got a finance committee chair, and one of the things that we stressed back to that individual was, well, how can we make the finances make sense to you? So we might have the fine detail for the accounts and everything like, but how can we structure it a little bit different so you actually understand it? And it's not that they haven't got, they've just not got deep skill in that area. But understanding the finances informs you to make the decisions that how to make. So you're not blindsided.
And it can also lead, actually, there's sometimes the people who don't understand the finance ask the question that then makes everybody else think, oh, hang on, what is that? Why are we doing that in that way?
Definitely, yeah.
I think it's realising that they can still make a contribution despite not being an expert in finance, and I think it's giving people that empowerment for their voices to be heard, and that's where having an effective chair is really important. But in terms of innovation in charities, I know you wanted to ask about that, didn't you, Harriet?
Yeah, how have you used innovation to deliver more impact to your roles as a CEO and a trustee?
So I think from an early stage, a bit like I said about when I was at the hospice, about kind of flipping the kind of structure of kind of donor first, beneficiary second, which sounds really uncomfortable and almost, when we talk about governance, is that the right thing to say? But if you think that way, I think that was probably the most innovative thing that I was able to do with my time within Smile in particular as well, where we really looked at, we started off in a recession, so finance was really difficult, and our objects were incredibly broad. There's some phenomenal charities out there doing some amazing work, and we're really struggling, and we're coming in with a new kind of approach and a new structure and trying to generate income. So we needed to generate income differently to not try and take away from the existing organisations. So we couldn't do the collection boxes and things like that because we were competing in a market that we shouldn't really be competing in, I felt, and the board felt. So Devil's Kitchen is probably the most innovative fundraising thing that we did, where we used basically what was available in a recession, which was struggling. So you had the hospitality industry, which obviously I knew, the venues were empty or struggling, so we could bring businesses into a venue on a Thursday night when it was quiet. We could bring 2 teams together and obviously generate income through corporate entertaining, and all of that was kind of done at a very zero or very limited cost, and then all of the generated funds could then go out. But within that, the innovative element of it was kind of thinking again, what are the component parts What have we got available to us, which is generally what charities can do in the best scenario anyway, and it's kind of what are the component parts that are out there, instead of asking for what do we need,
what have we got already, what resources can we use that are there.
Yeah, what else is out there. And I think we went on to raise a phenomenal amount of money for that, but the most important thing for that was never the money on the night. It was the relationships that was built. It was sharing the charity stories. It was, and you look at two of the charities that Smile first started helping, which is Downright Special and House of Light. And House of Light just moved into a new premises. They're going phenomenally well. Downright Special, I've always done things their way, which has been very consistent and making sure they work within the finances that they've got and with the skill set they've got, and they've grown and done really well. And I'd like to think that the innovative kind of side of looking at income generation really then helped with the work that we did from a structural point of view and from a governance perspective, because if you don't have the money in the bank you can't do anything, can you? I mean, it's very difficult, but particularly in a recession I think we needed to be innovative in our fundraising.
It's thinking about, like you say, the resources that you have. And I've done Devil's Kitchen and I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant as a team building exercise. My cooking is absolutely terrible. So my team did not win, but it was that getting to know the organisation, getting to know the charity. I might not have known that much before, but thinking, well, actually, it's here. This is the work it's doing. This is how we can support it as a business. We can bring our people in, give everyone a wonderful evening, and raise awareness as well.
And over a period of 8 hours, what we was doing as a charity, which people didn't really know, but was the purpose of it really, was building relationships with those individuals, which then became trustees, that then became donors. I mean, the amount of businesses that said to us in a conversation, we've not got any money, and then through that relationship and them seeing our hard work and getting to know us, all of a sudden they was able to find a donation or some resources for us, or how they'd come to us and say, you've been really innovative and you've helped us, how can we help you? There was another phenomenal gentleman, David Townend, who used to run Hull Trains. He was the marketing director, and I remember going to him in the recession and he just said, look Andy, he said, I can't give you much money, but what I can do is I can take you everywhere I go, and I'll introduce you to as many people as I can, and you can have the conversations and it's up to you. So it's that kind of, how can you use what you have got? I think sometimes one of the challenges in the sector can be the woe is us. We can sometimes, in under pressure and in a difficult circumstance, reach out and say, how hard things are. And I think sometimes what businesses and grant funders and other organisations, they want to see that in the right context. I think sometimes perceived failure and perceived challenges can come across as a weakness, obviously, can't it? And there's nothing wrong with putting your hand up and saying we need help. But what's the solution to that? How can somebody help you instead of just asking for money? Coming out and looking for the skills to find the money or
and
to find this.
I think that puts in context the Charity Commission, who have in the past tried to encourage charities to collaborate more and to work together, and all too often there's a focus on charities merging. But what I really like about some of the work that you've done is that you've collaborated with other charities, sometimes with a very distinct mission, but where you perhaps in your organisation didn't have that expertise or resource, you've gone to another organisation to say, how can we work together?
It's looking, it's going to your toolbox and finding the strength, isn't it? And I think even one of our deemed competitors when I was at Smile, we went quite far with a potential merger. So Smile Foundation and two ridings really explored that because it was the right thing to do. We had some strengths, they had some strengths, we had weaknesses, they had weaknesses, and combined on paper it looked like we'd be a phenomenal organisation, and we reduced the governance, we reduced the cost, all these different things. I mean, we went quite far with that and it didn't work out in the end, but exploring it again, a bit like we said earlier on, sometimes a perceived failure actually isn't, it's an exploration of a potential success in the future, and we definitely did that there. But yes, I think you've got to, in this day and age, and we all know charities are really struggling. We know that the communities generally are struggling, and we've got a lot of pressures. We do need to make sure we're working better together. At Beverley Housing Charity, for example, we've bought a bigger office than we need because we've got a financial strength, which from an asset point of view helps us to have that footprint that we've got. But we've opened all the ground floor up to lots of charities, we've now got more beneficiaries coming and using our office than we've got residents in homes. And that's because all of those organisations need space but can't afford that space, but they're actually within our charity constitution and governing document. It doesn't just say alms houses, it says relief in need. So instead of them giving them a one-off donation, we're providing them a home, we're providing them a base, and we've been able to bring Age UK back to Beverley in the East Riding after losing them 7 years ago, and that's helping by the end of the year hundreds of residents in the surrounding areas. So and that's breeding other conversations, and Parkinson's UK, U3A, WI, you name them, are benefiting from that space. But we're learning from those individuals because our residents are in a little bit of a bubble. We're looking after them already. They're getting a good service. We generally provide a high quality accommodation, and we've got people who can inform us of what the challenges are in the wider community to help to steer where we go next by helping others.
I think it's that as well, ensuring that as a charity leader, whether you're a trustee or a CEO, you don't become remote from the people who you're supposed to be helping and supporting. And I certainly, when I sat on a board, we were referred to as them upstairs by the members of the club because they felt we were taking all the decisions up there in the room on the top floor, and they weren't really engaged with that process. And it's all too easy for me, I think, sometimes when I was in that role, to assume I knew what people wanted and what they needed, but without having that really, had I spoken to them, had I found out, had I spoke to the other organisations working with them. And I really like that example because there's so much talk about isolation and people these days, people living their lives online, and bringing different organisations into your space also helps raise awareness about the work they can do with your residents. At WI, people can get involved.
We've had people handing over their driving licence because they've had some training with Humberside Fire and Rescue that's highlighted that actually they're more risky than they thought they were, in a positive way, but finding a pathway of how they can use public transport, how they can get attendance allowance, helping with taxi driver, all these sorts of things. You just can't bring. But I think sometimes you can, as you rightfully say, as a charity, you can get very blinkered to your objective and your aims, and forget that there's other people out there that are already kind of working in that space. And my old boss at Smile used to say, "Do what only you can do." To make sure you're the best version of yourself as an organisation, and work very closely in partnership with others.
Yeah, I think not being afraid to be innovative is really important. So not being scared to approach other charities like you have, or see a skills base in another charity where you can really work together, and forward thinking, forward planning, but also, like you've highlighted earlier, Andy, making sure it's in line with your governing document and your objects, because whilst innovation's great in charities and it's what makes them work, making these legal changes can take time. So forward planning is really key, especially if you need to approach a charity commission for consents, or if you need to meet with trustees to make changes, to make decisions. It can take some time to get the ball rolling with those things, which is why early innovation is really important.
Definitely, and making all your documents living documents. There's nothing worse than have stuffy files that you've written a policy years ago, and we broadly know what it is. But I think trying to have that kind of, we've got our mission on our wall in our boardroom and our core purpose, and we've got all these different bits on there, so when you're making a decision, you can see it.
Yeah,
does it
I really
actually
like
fit?
that. Yeah, and I really like your offices as well because you've got the history of the organisation along the wall as well. That journey over the years. Yeah,
and I think what we got into sometimes in the past was we were stuck in those older decisions, and the world had changed dramatically. And I think this is the thing that you've got to constantly look at as a charity is now more than ever, a year is a very long time in this world, isn't it? And as a charity, that can mean the difference between you being viable or not viable, or your mission or your vision being achieved, and you're no longer needed. And that's another thing for me is, in duplication, you've got to also look at yourself and say, being really honest, is what we're doing still the right thing to do, or is it time to hang up this organisation or go to another one in the grant? And we was having a conversation, wasn't we, earlier on about grant funding, and grant funders, I think one of the most we're not talked about in a governance sense and not talked about in a purpose. Are they still there? We as operating charities working on the ground are constantly challenged about costs and things like that, and you see it in the news and everything. But from a grant funder perspective, I think probably the biggest change in the sector that needs to happen is for a lot of grant funders to look at themselves, and I think some of the bigger ones have started to, and there's a couple that are closing down and spending all their endowment, and we're going to be closing down. I'm a grant manager for a local family, and we've changed dramatically the way that we worked. We used to just give out almost the begging letters came in and the money went out, and now the structure is very much about working with people and listening and understanding. And when sometimes, with the experience that I've got when I'm having the conversation, I'll challenge them to say, is that really what you want to speak to us about, or is there something else? And there was a great example in Sheffield where a charity was really struggling in their finances, but actually what would unlock the challenges is actually restructuring their management structure, which a grant funder 9 times out of 10 doesn't really find very attractive. Is funding the back office and keeping the lights on. It's generally about the outgo or a project, isn't it? And I really challenged the chief exec, and I said, I don't think you're going fair enough, I don't think you're asking me the right question. And we had a really honest conversation, and now we're funding them for 5 years, and we're funding their restructure, and we're embedding with them their restructure, which ties into all their governance. But they were drowning in work, basically, and everything, whether it was buying the coffee and the tea, through to actually delivering services and working with council leaders and NHS leaders, was kind of all reported into the chief executive, and he was just exhausted. And the governance on the board wasn't right either. So by unlocking that with some resource,
you can achieve
a lot more. Yeah.
And I think it's getting people to see that governance sounds so dry, doesn't it? It's because Harriet and I are charity lawyers, so we talk governance and charity law all day, and it can sound very boring. It's just hindrance, it's just red tape. But actually, you're explaining how when you use it effectively, it should help drive the organisation's mission. It shouldn't be seen as a hindrance to it.
No, it's the foundations to everything you do, isn't it? But I think if you read some of the information and take it as in the structure that it's currently in, it probably would put fear in some people and go, it's restricting us as opposed to empowering us. Whereas if you spend some time, like you rightfully said earlier, in getting that policy right, getting the structure right, and then living and breathing it, and changing the language a little bit for the day-to-day operation, but the principles still being the same, then actually it can help you flourish, as opposed to hold you back.
And it should certainly provide that framework that gives trustees and charity leaders comfort that they can sometimes make difficult decisions and they can have challenging conversations. Because if you've got your governance right and your meetings are well minuted and the rationale for the decision is explained and it's clear what decision's been made and who's actioning it, that's brilliant when it comes to justifying, well, at the time, these are the things we took into account. This was the advice that we had if we took the benefit of legal advice or support. And this was why we made that decision. And then there's unlikely to be a big stick from the Charity Commission. Why did you do that? As long as you can demonstrate that at the time you took well-informed decisions, thinking about your charity's mission, having your beneficiaries at the heart of that, people shouldn't be afraid, like Harriet said.
But as you know, I'm a trustee or director at Holderness House on Holderness Road, which is one of the most historical properties and kind of goes back to all the philanthropy across the city with Ferrens. And I'd been a trustee there for a few years, and you could see that the property and the approach that we had was coming to the end of its life. And we were going to have to think completely differently about what we were going to do, and obviously engage with yourselves and our accountants. And we was looking at it, and the existing board, were in a position where majority of them were ready to retire. So making any big decisions was quite hard. But equally, then COVID happened. So from a care home perspective, as we were, and there's a lot of big decisions to make there. But we came through that positively, thanks to the structure of the team and everybody. But then really kind of brought home, we need to make a decision about what next. And we were providing a home for about 34 older women from the local area. We were charging them, but we still charitable rates in what it was there, and it met our purpose. But the building really didn't meet the delivery. And when you look at the modern care home facilities and so on, it was we couldn't provide what could be provided elsewhere. So as a board, through a process, we made some really tough decisions, and the biggest decision of that was to close the care home down. Could we carried on operating for 2 to 3 more years? Probably. Was it the right decision to do that? No, because we needed to have the resources and the time to actually move the charity forward. And it's a massive and huge thing, but if you look back again at the governing document, you look back at the will of Ferrans, and you look at what actually his principles were and what he was looking to achieve, that care home actually, loosely fitted, but it wasn't really what he expected it to be. So looking back, but I mean, Ferrans in himself was such a phenomenal character. So when he wrote his will, he wrote it so it could be progressive, and we arguably hadn't been as progressive as we could have been. So made a really tough decision, and that was emotionally hard. We had to make a lot of people redundant. We had to move a lot of ladies out of the property as well. And now we're looking at kind of the new structure, but we're also modernising the building to be right and protect, which was the core element of the will, to protect that building and protect those 6 acres of land. And then working with partners. So we're looking to work with a housing partner to provide the housing on site, which actually was the core part of the will as well. So yes, I mean, I've been there, and I think there'll be a lot of people that I've spoken to previously and probably listening to this that you can't see that light at the end of the tunnel, and you can see the whole Daily Mail headlines and so on, but as long as you've done, as you've rightfully said, you've made the right decisions, you've done it in the right process, it's very transparent. There's not a decision that's made in close quarters, it's a collective decision again, then you've done the right thing. That's the thing. You've got to progress, or else we're just going backwards. And you'd end up with in that sense, we'd end up with a big building with no money left in the bank, and arguably keeping ladies in not as great accommodation as they could have been.
And it's such a huge untapped community resource, because when I visited Holderness House for the first time, I know when Harriet and I both visited, it's this Victorian stately home in the middle of Holderness Road, and I had no idea it was there. It's
a really hidden gem, really, isn't it? Yeah.
It's incredible, and there are some people living in that area who will have never had the opportunity to experience that. And we talk about not leaving governance and government and documents in a drawer till they become fusty. I think, Harriet, when you took a look at that original will with Andy and talked about it, you could see that the purposes went beyond. It was never really intended to be a care home in the first place. It was far broader than that.
And it was so clear that it was left permanently for the benefit of the community. And
that community needs had changed. When the original beneficiaries were in, the idea was for them to stay for a short period of time and move on, women in need in the area. So going back to that principle and looking at kind of what is the women in need position now, what do we need? Well, you look at some of the phenomenal charities in the local area, Menopausal, which are part of Neighbourhood Network, the House of Light we've talked about previously. There's some phenomenal charities out there that have got great purpose, course, and delivery, but the facility that we've got at Holderness House with the grounds, and it's so therapeutic, that can really be the difference between a good experience and a great experience for the beneficiaries of that charity.
And I think what you've done so well with Anne and Newlove as well is communicating to the community about what you're doing and why, telling the story of the charity's mission, because I've seen the video that was made of Holderness House and the grounds and the drone footage. It's just incredible, and it's that communication about what you're doing. And so I think we've learned so much today, Andy, from you coming on. It's been absolutely brilliant. I know this is difficult, but if you could summarise some advice for emerging charity leaders, the sort of next generation of charity leaders coming up, what would you go back and tell your younger self?
Well, this is probably the hardest one to answer, so I've wrote a few things down, but I think one of the things that people have challenged me about in the past is about being too generous with my time. So that used to always come across as I was always late, but I was probably just too generous with my time. So I think the number one thing is to remember how valuable your time is, and to invest that time in yourself, not just in others. So as much as one of the other aspects that I've got down here is about surrounding yourself with the right people, if you're not looking after yourself in the first instance, and we hear so much about charity leaders being under so much pressure, 9 times out of 10, that's because they're trying to do too many things. And the last thing they're doing is investing in themselves, whether that's education, whether it's reflecting on decisions that have been made, whether it's about really planning for the next thing. So less is more. I think it's probably, and that's something that I wish somebody had really grabbed a hold of me and then told me you were doing too much at an early stage. So definitely value your time and put a value on it. I had a great trustee at Smile who used to say, your asset is your time. It's not an apple, it's not an orange, it's not something physical, it is your time. But so start thinking about how you spend that and how people benefit from it. So that's probably the number one thing I would say. And then the best thing that I think I've been able to achieve is recruiting people and seeing, I've worked with some phenomenal people with a wide range of skill sets, but the attitude, I think generally 9 out of 10 recruits have been perfect for the organisation I've been at and brought people together. So I think investing some of the time I've just discussed in kind of horizon scanning and seeing who's out there. Again, skills matrix for your trustees and working it on that, but equally with your team. When you make a recruitment, I think with some of the smaller charities, you see people make a decision because it's the comfortable decision and it's the easy decision. That person's been working for us for a while. We've just got some funding in for a new role or a new type of role where we need to almost repay this person. Well, no, that's not going to help you as the leader. You're going to struggle and you're going to have to pick up some of the things they haven't got the skills to do because you're being too generous and you need to make a tough decision. So arguably making some of the tough decisions with people and then investing in those people as well. And then I mentioned before, thinking about the donor, thinking about the funder. What do they want in this day and age? How can you stand out from the crowd? How do you make sure you only ask when you really need? I think there's a lot of charities out there that continue to ask when they don't necessarily need yet. I was talking to a charity and they was asking me about some grant funding and I'd said, would you help us with this and could you pay for a grant writer? I said, well, what would the grant writer be doing? And he's like, well, so do you really need your core costs are covered? You've got some reserves. What is the, kind of only asking when you really need it? So I think being, reflecting on that and saying, how do we ask the right questions as opposed to kind of always taking everything that's your opportunities there. And then lastly, I think celebrating success. I think we move on to the next thing too quick. And as charities, you're looking at your vision or your mission and you kind of it's a long way away and you keep going and you have an element of success but you're on to the next thing. And I think that was probably one of my biggest weaknesses at Smile was I didn't give the team the opportunity to celebrate what we'd achieved because we were on the next thing already, the next day or so on. And so I think kind of making sure you put kind of key points in your journey to say this, let's look back, why did we succeed or why did we fail, why did we have a challenge, but celebrating that before you move on to the next thing.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much. There's so much there for people to take away and we love this because we learn as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear it from a practical lived perspective, so thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.